Purpose is not something you search for outside. It is something you remember from within. Have you ever noticed how so many people spend their entire lives searching for purpose as if they were looking for a lost object? They change jobs, relationships, cities, courses, and still carry that hard-to-explain emptiness. It feels like something is missing, but no one can quite name what it is. The truth is that this external, almost desperate search usually comes from a deep disconnection from one's own essence, from what is real before labels, expectations, and conditioning. From a very early age, we are taught to look outward more than inward. We learn to seek approval, belonging, and validation, as if our identity depended on it. And without realizing it, we fall into an illusion, the idea that purpose is hidden somewhere far away, when in reality, it has always been present, just muffled by the noise of the world. The problem is not a lack of purpose. The problem is a lack of presence and awareness to recognize it. What if I told you that purpose is not something you build, but something you remember? That it is not about becoming someone else, but about removing layers, observing patterns, questioning conditioning, and returning to the truth of who you have always been. Throughout this content, we will walk together through this awakening process, with practical reflections, everyday examples, and provocations that may challenge some of what you believe. And do not worry, the discomfort you might feel here is not a problem. It is the first sign that freedom is beginning to emerge. Disconnection from the true self. Disconnection from the true self almost never happens all at once. It is subtle and quiet. It settles in gradually, as we learn to adapt in order to fit in, to be accepted, to belong. Without noticing, we begin to live on autopilot, repeating patterns we did not consciously choose. Presence weakens, awareness falls asleep, and the internal feeling is that you're living a life that works on the outside but makes no sense on the inside. At some point, an uncomfortable feeling appears, hard to explain. Everything seems right, yet something does not align. It is like wearing a beautiful outfit that feels tight all the time. This sensation is often the clearest sign of the disconnection between who you truly are and the identity you built to please others. We confuse adaptation with authenticity, and we end up believing that being accepted matters more than being true. That is how the illusion grows stronger. A simple exercise to begin noticing this is honest observation of everyday life. Pay attention to situations where you stay silent. Make yourself smaller or force yourself to act differently for what your body is feeling. Ask yourself, does this come from my essence or from the fear of losing approval? This kind of question does not solve everything immediately, but it opens a crack in self-awareness. And once that crack appears, something inside you begins to want to return, even if it does not yet know exactly where. Authenticity and essence. Being authentic does not mean saying everything that comes to your mind or acting without filters and calling that freedom. Authenticity is when what you feel, think, and do begin to move in the same direction. It is living with more presence, without constantly reshaping yourself to fit external expectations. When you move closer to your essence, life becomes lighter because it no longer requires so much effort to sustain characters. Many people think essence is something mystical or distant, but it shows up in simple things. It is in what naturally excites you, in what truly bothers you, and how your body reacts when you say yes while wanting to say no. The more you observe yourself, the more you realize that your inner truth has always been there, just silenced by conditioning and the constant search for approval. Authenticity, at its core, is stopping the fight against that truth. A practical and powerful practice is to review your recent choices and ask, would I do this if no one were watching? This observation reveals a lot about whether your decisions come from individuality or from the need to belong. Readings such as The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle help develop this inner listening and strengthen awareness of the present moment. And when you start living this way, something interesting happens. You still adapt to the world, but without abandoning yourself in the process. Self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is not a destination. It is an ongoing relationship with yourself. There is no finish line and no certificate at the end. It is a process of continuous curiosity where you begin to observe thoughts, emotions, and reactions with less judgment. The more awareness you develop, the easier it becomes to notice when you're acting by choice or simply repeating old patterns. A good starting point is creating small rituals of presence. Writing for 5 minutes a day, walking without headphones, or simply pausing before responding automatically. In these pauses, truth appears more clearly. Books like The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz help question beliefs that seem like absolute truths, but are often pure conditioning. Over time, you begin to realize that you're not your thoughts, but the one who observes them. This internal shift changes everything. Identity stops being rigid and starts to be seen as a collection of stories that can be revised. And as this perception deepens, curiosity naturally arises about who this silent observer behind everything really is, creating the perfect bridge to the next point. Awareness, the observer. There comes a moment in awakening when you realize something simple yet transformative. You are not your thoughts, emotions, or reactions. You are the one who observes all of this happening. This observing awareness is silent, present, and does not engage in conflict. When you begin to access this space, life slows down on the inside, even if it remains busy on the outside. In daily life, this practice begins very practically. When something throws you off balance, instead of reacting impulsively, you pause and observe what is happening inside me right now. This observation creates space between stimulus and response. The body relaxes, the mind clears, and you stop being a hostage to old emotional patterns. It is not about controlling. It is about noticing. Over time, this posture changes your relationship with identity itself. What once felt like who I am begins to be seen as a passing experience. The illusion of a fixed identity weakens, and a sense of freedom appears, almost like relief. This broader perspective prepares the ground to more deeply question the masks that were built along the way. The illusion of the constructed identity. The greatest trap of the constructed identity is that it feels extremely real. You grow up hearing who you should be, how you should act, what you're allowed to feel. Gradually, these ideas become internal truths. The problem is that this version of you is born more from conditioning than from essence, and the more you try to sustain it, the farther you move from your own truth. This illusion persists because it offers immediate rewards: approval, belonging, a sense of safety. But the cost is high. In order to remain accepted, you start ignoring bodily signals, silencing desires, and adapting opinions. Presence diminishes, awareness fragments, and that familiar sense of emptiness returns, even when everything seems to be going well. A simple exercise is to observe the phrases you use to define yourself. I am like this. I have always been this way. I am not good at that. Often, this is not identity. It is emotional habit. Books like Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill help reveal the power of beliefs in shaping personal reality. When you begin to question these stories, identity stops being a prison and becomes something flexible, opening space to see the patterns that still need attention in the next step. Conditioning and patterns. Conditioning works like programs running in the background. They do not ask for permission. They just repeat. They come from family, culture, school, and past experiences. And what is curious is that even when they no longer make sense, they continue to guide choices, reactions, and even dreams. Without awareness, we call this personality. With observation, we begin to see that they are simply learned patterns. These patterns show up very practically, repeating similar relationships, reacting the same way to criticism, feeling guilt when setting boundaries. The body usually speaks before the mind does, through tension, fatigue, or irritation without a clear reason. When you start paying attention to these signals, something shifts. Presence increases, and you realize that not every reaction needs to become action. A simple way to begin breaking these cycles is through small conscious interruptions. Before responding, breathe. Before deciding, feel. Ask, does this come from my truth or from fear of stepping out of the script? Books like Atomic Habits by James Clear help explain how patterns are formed and how they can gradually be transformed. And when a pattern loses strength, space opens to listen to something far wiser than natural intelligence of your own body. Listening to the body. The body is speaking all the time, but we were trained to ignore it. Headaches, tightness in the chest, constant fatigue. None of this is random. These are clear messages of disconnection between how you live externally and what your essence is asking for internally. When you begin to listen to the body with presence, it becomes an honest guide, direct, and impossible to deceive. Listening to the body does not require complex techniques. It starts with simple questions. How does my body react when I say yes? And what do I feel physically when I force myself into something? The answer almost always comes before the mind. A knot in the stomach, heaviness in the shoulders, or a sense of expansion and lightness. This kind of observation strengthens self-knowledge and reduces the influence of old emotional patterns. Practices like conscious stretching, deep breathing, or even walking without distractions help restore this communication. Books like The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk expand awareness of how unresolved emotions manifest physically. When you learn to respect these signals, you begin to set clearer boundaries. And this naturally leads to the next point, the end of the need for external approval. The end of the need for approval. The need for approval is one of the last threads that still ties us to the old identity. It begins early, when we learn that being accepted feels safer than being true. Over time, this habit becomes a constant filter. You think, feel, and decide while imagining how you will be perceived. Presence weakens, inner truth becomes muted, and freedom always feels slightly out of reach. As awareness grows, something changes. You realize that pleasing everyone costs far too much. The body responds with exhaustion, irritation, or even anxiety when you betray yourself to maintain an image. Honest observation reveals something important. Those who live seeking approval rarely feel true belonging because they are always performing a role. A simple exercise is to notice how often you explain yourself unnecessarily or ask permission to be who you are. Try small doses of authenticity. Say no without long justifications. Express an opinion respectfully. Hold your boundaries. Books like The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown help reframe vulnerability and belonging. And when external approval loses strength, something powerful happens. Your individuality begins to occupy the space that has always belonged to it. Respect for your own individuality. Respecting your individuality does not mean placing yourself above others. It means stopping the habit of making yourself smaller to fit in. It is recognizing that you have your own rhythm, your own way of feeling, thinking, and acting, and that this does not need comparison to be valid. As this respect strengthens, presence increases and life begins to flow with less resistance because you stop fighting who you are. Many people abandon their own truth while trying to fit into ready-made models of success, relationships, or spirituality. The cost of this is internal disconnection. The body feels it, energy drops, and the feeling of always chasing something appears. Respecting individuality means understanding that your path does not need to make sense to everyone. It only needs to be coherent with your essence. A simple practice is to stop explaining yourself so much. Observe where you still justify choices that already feel right to you. This observation reveals where conditioning still has more authority than awareness. Books like The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron help unlock individual expression without guilt. And when you sustain this inner respect, the next step arises almost naturally: true freedom to be who you are. Freedom to be who you are. The freedom to be who you are does not arrive as a loud declaration, but as a calm silence within. It is the moment when you realize that you no longer need to explain yourself so much or constantly reshape yourself. Presence becomes steadier, awareness clearer, and life starts to feel coherent. Not because everything became easy, but because it now makes sense. This freedom is born from alignment between truth, body, and action. You feel when something is a real yes, and when it is a necessary no. Boundaries stop feeling selfish and begin to feel like self-care. Authenticity stops being an effort and becomes a consequence. And interestingly, the more you respect your individuality, the less you feel the need to prove anything to anyone. In practice, this shows up as simple and courageous choices, changing routes, adjusting relationships, honoring your rhythm. Questions like, does this expand or contract my body? Or does this respect my essence? Become inner compasses. Books like The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murphy help strengthen this inner trust. And when this freedom is lived not as an idea, but as experience, the cycle closes and something inside you knows that it is time to integrate all of this consciously. Throughout this journey, one thing becomes increasingly clear: this is not about becoming someone new, but about removing what was never you. Each stage, from disconnection to the recovery of freedom, is an invitation to live with more presence, more truth, and less fear of losing approval. As awareness expands, patterns become visible, conditioning loses strength, and authenticity stops being a beautiful concept and becomes a daily practice. Now comes the honest pause, where today are you still betraying yourself in order to belong? In which areas of your life is your body already asking for boundaries, but you insist on ignoring them? What would change if you began to respect your individuality without needing external permission? These questions do not demand immediate answers. They ask for observation, and that is where true awakening begins. If this content resonated with you, do not let it stay only in reflection. Start small, but start. Choose one action today that is more aligned with your essence. And if you want to continue deepening this process of self-knowledge, awareness, and freedom to be who you are, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. This way, you continue walking with me from the inside out in a way that truly transforms.